Hi, it's Dr. Fox, and let's talk about the top 5 mental illnesses in America. And this is specific for adults, so I can do a different one on children. Just leave comments and I'll get to it. So the first one is depression. And we've all certainly heard about depression and understand how it impacts how people live their life and how they get through their life and how it impacts relationships and work and other factors. I think there is some confusion between depression and sadness. Now, depression, the clinical condition, is when it is absolutely impacting your relationships, how you see yourself, how you see others. And you need to know that depression creates a distortion over not only how you see yourself, but how you see others and your life. And the three probably central components: hopelessness, helplessness, and worthlessness. And these are three particular issues or symptoms related to depression that could be an indication that it is more of a clinical issue. Now, the other side of depression, which is more colloquial and common, stuff like that, is sadness. And sadness is when you're kind of bummed. You're upset about something and it kind of stinks and you're like, oh, you just feel sad about it. Could be a flat tire at work. Not only is that you're frustrated, but you're kind of feeling sad and bummed about it. But it doesn't impact how you get through your day. It doesn't impact how you see yourself and others. And that's a pretty big distinction between the two. Depression, more clinical, it's going to impact how you see yourself, others, and how you function within your life. And your sadness, which is not depression, is kind of being bummed, but you're still able to do the things you need to do. Now, number 2 are dissociative disorders. Now, dissociative disorders, this is when we sort of separate from the environment around us, and sometimes we feel a separation inside ourselves or from ourselves. Now, this dissociation can sometimes come out of past trauma, can also come out of severe stress, paranoia, could also sometimes come out of a psychotic break or other types of issues with that dissociation, that separation from self and the environment. And it's not just where you feel like, oh, I just don't want to be with that person, or that, oh, I don't want to hang out with them, things like that. Dissociative disorders is when you do separate. It's this clinical separation from your environment. You feel a part of yourself. In movies, a lot of times, they'll explain it as saying, oh, you're looking down on yourself or something like that. And it can sometimes feel that way. It's not quite that easily described and felt. But again, it's that separation. What happens when I'm in session with someone and they are dissociating, what we see is that there's this sort of glazed over look, and you get the sense that they're not really present. And the individual, it's not out of boredom. I mean, come on, you're in session with me, you're not gonna be bored. But it's out of stress. It's that your ego state, that your psychology, your psychological self can't handle the topic or the issue or what's going on. So what it does as a defense mechanism is it separates. Now, it becomes a dissociative disorder when it becomes so prominent. It occurs on a regular basis or a prolonged basis, and it impacts how you live your life and how you get things done. The next one is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. First and foremost, what I want to tell you is there's no more ADD. ADD is an antiquated term that we don't use anymore. There's no attention deficit disorder. It's not. That one's gone. What we've done is now the field has ADHD, but there's 3 types, and you may not know. So the first one is inattentive type, and that's like you just can't focus. You're kind of looking all around, and when you're supposed to focus, you kind of just can't. This individual cannot just hyper focus. It's not out of boredom. It's not out of disinterest, and it's not out of apathy or fatigue. It's that they just can't rein it in. And when we do testing in my practice, when we see someone that has an inattentive type of ADHD, that we're doing some work, and we're trying to get them to do a different part of the assessment, and then they just start to look around the room, or they start to just sort of, you can tell they're not fully attending. And it's not purposeful. That's part of what makes it the disorder, is that they can't really control it. It's that deficit that impairs their ability to focus. Now, another type of ADHD is hyperactive impulsive. Now, hyperactive impulsive, in the same scenario, we're trying to test them, we're trying to figure out what's going on, help them out, get some information. And hyperactive inattentive is that they can't sit still, right? They're fidgeting, they're kind of moving around a lot, and maybe they're clicking on a pen, something like that, and they just can't seem to sit still. And sometimes, in some cases, they get up and they have to walk around the room. They have to keep moving. It's this restlessness. It's that old phrase that they're acting as though they're driven by a motor. And it's this need to keep going and keep going and keep going. And that hyperactivity is what we're talking about. The impulsiveness is the inability to control that hyperactivity. You just can't rein it in. So, you're needing to go and I just need to do it. A lot of times when we're doing testing, folks that have hyperactive impulsive type, just one example, is that they'll touch the stimulus material, kind of the testing material. You're not supposed to touch it unless we tell you, but folks with this particular disorder and those with that hyperactive impulsive type, they just can't help it. They just have to touch it. Now, the third subtype is combined. Now, in this case, we'll see individuals that have inattentive and hyperactive impulsive type. So we have both. So not only can they not focus their attention on what they need to or want to, but that hyperactivity and that impulsivity gets in the way. So not only are they moving and grooving and bopping around, but they can't rein it in. They can't rein in that focus. And it makes really hard to learn new information. So in a therapy setting, for folks that have ADHD, this combined type, or any of the other two subtypes that we talked about, we got to deal with that first. We got to get that ADHD under control. Or what happens is that in session, they may be able to focus on me a little bit. They may be able to rein it in just with some strategies that we might go over or practice. And then once they leave, right, you forget. It's what I like to call the grocery store effect. You know your list, you're in the car, you get there, you know what you got to get. And as soon as you walk into the grocery store, what am I doing here? I don't really know. What do I need to get? That's not what I'm doing here. You know you're going shopping. But you forget what you have to get. Number four. Number four is post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, this is a disorder that is very, very complex. Individuals have experienced some type of trauma. Now, this trauma can be a singular incident or it can be a prolonged incident. And it's important to recognize that everybody experiences or reacts to trauma in a different way. People classify trauma in their own way. It can be very individualized. So that's why it's important. We can't say that somebody who has experienced combat, for example, everybody gets PTSD, because that isn't true. The data doesn't support that. But on the other side, we can't say that individuals that have experienced abuse all experience PTSD symptoms. But many do. So it's important to realize how that person experienced it. Then we have to identify those symptoms. And these symptoms, which could be flashbacks, nightmares, inability to relate to friends, partners, family members, also it impacts their ability to get through their day, to function. You'll notice that this seems like that component, a pretty common theme, because it's one of those prevalent or universal conditions, what I like to call it, across many disorders or all disorders, is that it has to have what's called socioeconomic dysfunction. And this is that it impacts your ability to socialize, it impacts your ability to go to school or go to work or get the money or knowledge that you need in order to progress in your life. And PTSD is the same thing. The trauma impacts that. It's that trauma incident. And working with trauma, a lot of times what happens is it's not just the resolution of the trauma, coming to terms with it, radically accepting it, whatever it may be, however the person may get there, but it's also reframing in many ways themselves, seeing themselves beyond their trauma, having conquered it, survived it. And this can be a very long process. It's certainly a complex process, and everybody experiences it differently. So that's our number 4 is PTSD. Now, number 5, most common mental illness in the United States, is schizophrenia. Now, schizophrenia is often misunderstood, and people tend to focus on hallucinations. It can be auditory hallucinations, visual hallucinations, but there's other components. Delusions can also be a part of it. Can also be some catatonia where it's hard to move, or it can be more of a restless type as well. So schizophrenia is very, very complex. It's actually very rare. And in many cases, what we have to do is when we see individuals that have psychotic episodes or are going through a psychotic episode, we have to rule out substances. That's central. That's critical. And even though we're only talking about the top 5, that's actually number 8. So if you want me to do the next 5 in a video, just leave a comment and let me know and I'll get back to it. But number 8 is addiction and substance abuse, is considered a mental illness and is one of the most common in the United States. But have to rule that out. We have to rule out substances. Then we have to rule out traumatic brain injury. Then we also have to rule out, could it be due to a noxious chemical? Could it be due to any other external factor? So we have to weed those things out. Then we get to the behavior. When did it occur? We have to get those good histories. And that's so important. It's about understanding those symptoms and conditions so that we know that it's schizophrenia. And schizophrenia isn't just a single disorder. There's many disorders under the schizophrenia umbrella. There's brief psychotic episode. There's schizotypal personality disorder. There's also schizophrenia form. So there's a whole host of stuff that it could be. So schizophrenia is kind of the big one. And again, important to know that schizophrenia is also on a spectrum. So it can be mild, moderate, severe, or extreme. And we have to define that. Schizophrenia or psychotic disorders require medication. Now, if it is a psychotic break, and I work with individuals with borderline personality disorder, these individuals are at a higher likelihood to actually have a psychotic break, but that psychotic break usually doesn't last more than maybe a couple hours. Now, in some instances, it may last longer, but it typically doesn't qualify, and that's using the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, doesn't qualify for a brief psychotic episode. So it's much shorter in duration, but it's certainly scary and certainly frightening. So those are the top 5: depression, dissociative disorders, ADHD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and schizophrenia. These are the most common mental illnesses in the United States in adults at this time. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Check out some of my other ones and like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.